Hi. For those of you who are returning, welcome back. And for those who are new to this YouTube channel, I sincerely hope that you will find something useful in your search for truth and meaning in the crazy times we live in. And there is no doubt but what we are living in crazy times. Just before I awoke early this morning, my mind was carried away in thought. I can't say it was a dream or a vision, as much as it was a conversation in my sleeping head. The topic of the conversation was about all of the isms of our time, and how we often get caught up in declaring and defending our individual and collective ideas about how things should work in this world, and then taking the additional steps to persecute and even prosecute those whose ideas differ from our own. These differences in economic, political, and religious opinions have fueled wars, strife, bloodshed, and destruction for thousands of years. In my sleeping state, I perceive that these conflicts will continue and become even more widespread in the coming days, at every level, from global to individual, until the Lord decides he has had enough and sends Jesus back in the nick of time to save us from ourselves. As the conversation in my head continued, I was reminded of how the ministry of Jesus Christ had a tendency to threaten the status quo of his time on the earth. When he taught, people gathered to listen, whether out of conviction or curiosity or contempt. While he did not advocate for revolution or destruction of society, there were individuals in power who felt threatened by what he taught. For example, regarding the Roman law, which required people to carry the burden of a Roman soldier for a specific distance, such as a mile per the King James Version of the Bible, Jesus said to carry it twice that far. He said to render unto Caesar that which was Caesar's. In other words, pay your taxes. He also said to agree with your adversaries rather than to argue and fight with them. And yet, his references to his relationship with God and the kingdom of God led his opponents and detractors to claim that he was an insurrectionist trying to foment rebellion against the Roman Empire. On the night he was betrayed, while praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, Simon Peter whipped out his trusty sword and applied it to the head of a servant of the high priest, removing his ear. Jesus told Simon Peter to put his sword away, and then he healed the servant's wound. When he stood before the Jewish leaders and then before Pontius Pilate, he didn't say much in his own defense. After all, he was being accused of claiming to be who he was and is. But Jesus did not shy away from the persecution and torment. Later on, neither did Simon Peter, who was later crucified upside down, or so they say, believing himself unworthy to be killed in the same manner as his Lord and Master. And the Apostle Paul wrote about the persecution he suffered, as well as his time in prison and several shipwrecks. My thoughts then turned to a story in the Book of Mormon about a group of repentant sinners who accepted the gospel of Jesus Christ. They had been a very wicked and murderous people, and when they gained a testimony of Christ, they followed him wholeheartedly, burying their weapons and swords and refusing to ever use them again to take another life. When their unrepentant countrymen turned against them and began to attack them for their religious beliefs, they would kneel and pray and suffer themselves to be slain rather than to take up their weapons in self-defense. At this point, I rose from my bed and began my activities of the day and continued to ponder about the conversation that was going on in my head. And I eventually decided to get out my computer and start typing. It's been a long day of typing, but I won't take that long to read it. Perhaps some of Jesus' early followers hoped that his trial, crucifixion, and death and resurrection would result in an immediate heavenly manifestation and overthrow of the Roman Empire, ushering in the millennial reign of the resurrected Christ. That seems to be a question that was posited by some of the believers in the church in Thessalonica, to whom Paul wrote letters, telling them that the day would not come until after a falling away, an apostasy, if you will, and the appearance of the son of perdition, or the Antichrist, as some refer to him. The schisms of the world today will not be resolved by us taking one another's lives, destroying property, or any other violent activity designed to inflict our individual or collective will on our fellow beings. But that does not mean that wicked, misinformed, or even well-intentioned people will not continue to behave in this manner, especially when they perceive it to be in their best interests, such as when they think they have been mistreated, or that they deserve more than what they have, or they're not being fairly compensated, or their ancestors were not treated fairly. Any number of reasons why people will continue to do these things, to try to get even with other people. Today, many people, like those in the early church, are sensing that religious persecution is getting worse. My wife says that I have a persecution complex, for example, and they are hoping to be spared from the trials of the tribulation. Some of us are stockpiling food and other supplies. Some of us are buying weapons and stockpiling ammunition to defend ourselves, our family, and our property. I still keep a short samurai sword that I purchased when I served as a missionary in Japan many years ago. It's not very sharp, but it has a pointy end. And of course, we probably all have an assortment of quite lethal kitchen knives to defend ourselves as a last resort. But in the final 5 of the 10 commandments given to Moses, the Lord gave us a number of directives designed to guard against harming one another, forbidding us to kill, commit adultery, steal, lie, or even covet one another's property. It's almost like he gave us the commandments telling us not to, quote, be bad. Don't be bad. These are bad things. But is not being bad the same as being good? For example, Peter did not kill the high priest's servant. He merely cut off his ear, which was not listed as being prohibited in the 10 Commandments. It didn't say, thou shalt not cut off the high priest's ear. It didn't say that. But the gospel of Christ contains a higher law, the law of love. It seems to me that truly loving one another requires more than merely not killing them. Perhaps being a true disciple of Christ entails more than simply not being bad, but to do as the Lord told Peter, to put away our swords, as did the people in the story from the Book of Mormon. Maybe it requires a kind of sacrifice we haven't considered. It might entail the sacrifice of our lives, as in being put to death. But perhaps there's even more. Perhaps it entails a conscious effort and a conscious sacrifice of the manner in which we live our lives. And so, what can we do to create a world where we not only stop being bad, but where we live in a manner that reduces the temptations of others to be bad? Must we learn to live in a manner that makes other people not want to kill us? In a broader sense, must we behave in a manner that reduces the human tendency of others to behave badly? When we purchase a cool sports car, fancy attire, or seek to live in the nicest house we can find, are we not only purchasing the items we covet, but also causing others to covet those same items when they see us having them? Must we learn to drive in a manner that reduces the tendency of others to engage in road rage incidents? Something to think about. If we want to live in a world where Christ reigns supreme, as in the millennial reign, where Satan is bound and has no power, due in part to the righteousness of the world's inhabitants, and everyone abides by the higher laws of love for God and for one another, something must change. I must change. Some of you have noticed that the video background I use has changed. This is what happens when you stay in a different place with different artwork. I'm currently in Montana, but plan to go back and forth to my home in Texas as circumstances allow. One of the things I have noticed in Montana is a religious group called Hutterites or Hutterites. I'm not sure which way they would have you pronounce it. They are an Anabaptist sect similar to the Amish and the Mennonites. They live in communal agricultural colonies in the northern United States and Canada. They have all things in common, as did the early saints. They are assigned to live in homes on the colony based upon the size of their families, and they all dress in very conservative attire, with all the girls wearing dresses made from the same pattern, etc. I have seen them shopping at second-hand stores after participating at the local farmers market, where they sell produce, pies, and other food that they have prepared at the colony. The rhubarb pies are especially delicious, I must add. Staying on the colony is voluntary, and some of the youth decide to leave and be part of what some might call normal society. But the colonies continue to grow and expand, splitting into additional colonies when they grow too big. The young people marry people from other colonies in order to avoid inbreeding. They have lived this way for hundreds of years. The early saints also tried to live in this manner, having all things in common. The Bible tells us of one couple who sold a piece of property and donated the proceeds to the church, but kept back part of the proceeds for themselves. They were caught in their pious dishonesty and were stricken dead by God, bringing fear upon the entire church. It is challenging, even today, to be in the world, but not of it. This reminds me of the words of a song called Simple Gifts by Joseph Brackett. I learned to sing with my junior high school chorus. It goes like this. I'm sure you've heard it before. 'Tis the gift to be simple, 'tis the gift to be free. 'Tis the gift to come down where I ought to be. And when we find ourselves in the place just right, we'll be in the valley of love and delight. When true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend we shan't be ashamed. To turn will be my delight, till by turning we come round right. Dear friends, I'm not sure how we get to where we need to be to live in the presence of our Savior. But I think these people have a little bit of a clue. We might all need to learn a little bit from them, regardless of what our particular ism is. It is my prayer that you will find charity and humility and love in your heart for all those around you, whether you disagree with them or whether you agree with them. And maybe we can all learn to be and to accept the gift of simplicity. Thank you, and we'll see you again soon. Bye for now.